It's August of 1991, and after having only moved to New York 3 weeks previously, I had already used up all my money, and I wasn't going to get my first paycheck for about another week, and I was hungry. So I obsessively kept checking the cabinets in the apartment that I was subletting, and all I kept coming up with was this half-white bag of flour, some salt, and in the far reaches, this little tiny packet of yeast. So I made bread. That began my decades-long passion for bread baking. I threw myself into it, made starters, different flours, different recipes, different formulas. I became the go-to bread person for everybody in my life, making about 15 loaves a week and just giving it away to anybody who asked. When my partner and I moved in together, we wanted to make the hallmark of our relationship hospitality. So we had these weekly meals where we'd invite people over, friends, relatives, and we would have the bread as a centerpiece there. Sadly, my bread making came to a very abrupt halt when I had to become the primary caregiver for my partner, Peter. He had been getting increasingly sicker with AIDS-related pneumonia, neuropathy, losing his eyesight, and on top of all of that, he was losing his mental health. He sunk into very deep clinical depressions, and he was cycling in and out of psychiatric institutions all the time. In August of 2012, Peter tragically took his life, and my life fell apart. I just withdrew from the world. I stayed at home, I stopped working, I didn't talk to anybody, and that was all I wanted to do was envelop myself in my grief. On a frigid, cold December morning, I realized I had no food in the house. Made me think of those first days back in New York, but this time I had plenty of supplies. So I fed the starter, and I made 8 baguettes. I ate the piece of one, and then immediately felt extremely pathetic and really stupid. I had all this bread, no one to share it with, and it was just gonna go stale in no time at all. That following cold morning, I forced myself to put on my winter coat, my winter boots, and I trudged the 12 blocks to the Bowery Mission, right on Christie and Stanton and Bowery, right there, to give this bread to homeless men. And I walk in, and they're just finishing breakfast, and the guy in charge said, "Sorry, Board of Health rules, we can't take food donations from anybody, but you're free to distribute it on the street." And I felt even more pathetic, more stupid, and I started walking over to the park on Christie and Stanton just to sit on a park bench and go into another crying jag. I turned around, and 4 or 5 guys from the Bowery Mission had followed me, and I thought, shit, on top of all of this, I'm going to get mugged. One of the guys approached me and just said, "You got bread?" And I took out the bread bag, I broke open the baguette, broke the baguettes, gave it out to different people, not a word, not a thank you, nothing. I got up to leave, and that same man turned to me and said, "You coming back next week?" And I said I would try. That following Sunday, I made 10 loaves of sourdough bread, and I walked over to the park, and the guys were waiting for me. And I handed it out and gave them the warnings about don't eat too much fresh bread, you'll get a bellyache, break it apart and share it with as many people as you can. And this week there was more conversation. There was a lot more talking. People were connecting with their bread memories. One man said to me, "I remember my grandmother making this cornbread in a skillet in the oven down south." And I said, "Well, make your cornbread. I know how to do that." Another guy said, "I remember running home for Sabbath and having the challah and ripping off a piece and eating it." And I said, "Well, then I'll make challah." In the ensuing weeks, there were an awful lot more requests for bread from these guys. And my moniker became Bread Man. And there was an awful lot more sharing, and there was an awful lot more talking and camaraderie. The paper bag covered bottles of nitrate were easily getting passed around. They even took up a collection for me in a paper cup of loose change so I can buy flour. When all of you leave here tonight, when you pass a homeless person, drop some coin, it might be buying some of my next batch of whole wheat. So do that for me. But there was this lightness that was coming over all of these men. Even the men who suffered from mental health or drug use issues, they were always screaming at their demons. They started talking a little bit more gently to their demons. And I thought, this is special. This is profound. This is church. On a beautiful May Sunday morning, I had my bread bag on my back, and I'm just going into the park on Christie Street, and I hear, "Bread man, yo, what you got?" And I held up the bread bag, and I said, "A whole lot of ciabatta." And one guy grimaced, and he said, "I had a hankering for your focaccia." And another guy said, "Not me, I've become partial to your country pond rustique." And we all howled laughing. And a guy bellowed, "Bread man, you performed a miracle. You converted crack addicts into connoisseurs." And we all howled laughing. I still say the bigger miracle was the multiplication of the loaves. I wasn't making more bread. They were sharing it more with more people. And I still say the bigger miracle was the transformation happening in me. I became lighter. I started laughing. I let go of my grief. I went back to work, and I was so grateful for that. I had a really religious upbringing growing up, and I don't know how many thousands of times I must have prayed that prayer, "Give us this day our daily bread." I never knew what it meant. I never cared what it meant. But I know now there's sacred space in New York City. And on the corner of Christie and Stanton on a park bench, I was enlightened by homeless men who I'm sure were heaven sent as to the true meaning of that prayer. And they had a real strong part in my rebirth. Amen.